Hello, my name is Frank Biro. I'm the principal investigator of Growing Up Female, the study that your daughters have been involved with over the past 10 years. And what I'd like to do today is to talk a little bit about where we've been, what we're doing, and where we plan to go. So one of the questions that you've often asked me is, why are you studying puberty? So the biggest issue is that we're concerned about some of the recent findings we've noted in women with breast cancer occurring at younger ages and a much more aggressive form in some of these younger women. There's been a lot of interest expressed by the community about the potential impact of some environmental exposures on breast cancer. We also know that there's several different risk factors that are associated with young adult life that are related to breast cancer risk. These include the age of the first period, or we call it menarche, the age at which there's a first full-term pregnancy, the age of menopause, and the adult height, as well as the age in which the young lady has this phenomenon called peak height velocity, which is the fastest time that she grows. We know that these factors are somehow associated with puberty and with breast cancer. We don't know exactly what the mechanism is or why it happens. We think that there may be some association with some of the growth hormones, with an expression of some of the genetic susceptibility, the relationship with obesity, and these exposures to environmental factors. Well, what happens during puberty? You can see that on the top part of the slide, Drs. Fenton and Russo had developed this theory called the windows of susceptibility, where they talk about what's happening at birth, during early puberty, and with pregnancy, with the changes that are occurring within the breast, which are on the very top of the line. So at birth, there is the outgrowth of some of the primitive breast buds. With early puberty, there's outgrowth of more breast ducts and the formation of what we'll call terminal end buds within the breast. With pregnancy, this is the formation of type 3 and 4 lobules, and these are the type of structures within the breast that are much less susceptible to these environmental influences. What's happening in the girl at these times? If you go to the bottom part under the arrow, you then see that, well, at birth, the girls, during the first several months of life, have a functioning hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis. And so this is the same pubertal axis that they'll have when they're in puberty as young women. For some reason, in the first 6 months of life, the axis gets turned off. Around ages 5, 6, or 7, there's the production of hormones from the adrenal gland. And these adrenal hormones we call adrenarche. Shortly after that, there's the reactivation of this hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis, and about 1.5 to 2 years after that, the young lady will experience her peak height velocity. 6 months after that, she'll generally have her first menstrual period. At the same time that all these things are happening, the skeleton is developing stronger and stronger bone by absorbing more and more calcium and laying down that calcium into the bone matrix. And indeed, in the early to mid-20s, a woman will have her maximum amount of calcium stored in the bones. So this breast stage 2, up to and including early pregnancy, we consider a window of susceptibility. So the questions that we had are, what are the things that determine puberty? And we examined biologic factors, toxologic, that is exposure factors, psychological factors, and things that are occurring within the family history of breast cancer and other issues. We tried to focus on early pubertal milestones and tried to assess that in each of the girls in the study. And we were examining these determinants, both in the environment as well as things that were happening with the girl. So we were looking at what was happening with her body composition, what was she eating, how was she eating it, looking at family history of breast cancer and other factors. We were looking at the family environment, looking at stressors that were occurring to the young lady, whether it be at home or in school or with her friends. Again, with the blood in the urine, assessing, evaluating the exposures to the environment, and the one part that we've only started beginning to do was looking at the different small changes in the genetic information that varies from one individual to the next. We didn't do it just here in Cincinnati, but we were also involved in a network at 2 other sites. Dr. Mary Wolf, who is involved with the Long Island Breast Cancer Project, is at Mount Sinai School of Medicine, and she recruited girls in East Harlem. Dr. Larry Kushi, who is a nutrition epidemiologist and his interest is looking at nutritional factors in cancer, is at Kaiser Permanente of Northern California. And they enrolled families through the Kaiser Permanente of Northern California. And then, of course, here in Cincinnati, we called the project Growing Up Female. The 2 other sites recruited girls at 6 through 8, and we recruited girls at 6 and 7 years of age. If you look at the 3 sites combined, you can see that most of the girls were age 7 at the onset of the study. Here in Cincinnati, the girls were pretty much evenly split between 6 and 7 years of age. And you can take a look at the different race and ethnic groups. Again, here in Cincinnati, most of the participants were white or black, with a small number of Hispanic girls and Asian girls. But across the 3 sites, if you compared the girls when they came in at age 7, you can see that there's an amazing similarity between the 3 sites in how much the girls weighed, as well as what their body mass index is. Again, body mass index is a way of looking at both their height and their weight, and it's adjusting their body size and body shape for their height. This shows you everything that you and your girls were involved with over the 10 years of the current study. And so that for the first 5 or 6 years of the study, the girls were coming in every 6 months. We were getting their height and weight and their body circumferences and skin folds, and those are those anthropometric measures you see in the first line. We were looking to see how far they were in pubertal maturation. Once a year, we were getting their urine, which we were sending for biomarkers. And once a year, we were getting blood for those biomarkers. But if you slide down 2 lines, you see that we were actually drawing blood twice a year. The alternate visits during those years, we were using not only for exposures, but we were also looking at other factors such as their cholesterol and lipid levels, such as their hormone levels, such as their insulin levels. And we've reported back to you, the cholesterol and the insulin values. You also are very aware that you were getting called 4 times a year to ask about the 24-hour diet recalls. And you can see as we've gone through the study that we've done that far less. And I'm sure that you're probably thankful that we're not calling you 4 times a year anymore for that. We also assessed in many of the girls their DEXA scans. Again, these are the scans in which we looked at the amount of bone mineral that was in their skeleton. And we also gathered information about some body composition measures. So this is what the protocol has been, and the protocol that in year 10 we are currently involved with. A little bit of the results that we've been finding from the study. So a couple years ago, we reported that the African American girls were a little bit more mature than the girls from this study called the Pediatric Research and Office Setting, or PROSE study. So that the 7-year-old girls were a little bit more mature. But now that we have collected all the data, we find that although the 7-year-old girls were a little bit more mature, that overall the African American girls in our study were very similar to the PROSE study. They matured a little bit earlier than the next slide, which shows the white non-Hispanic girls. And in the first line, we see the Pediatric Research and Office Settings. This was a study that was published in 1997, and many people said, my goodness, this is much earlier than we anticipated. In the blue line, you can see the girls who were below the 85th percentile. So we looked at this distribution of body mass index, and we chose the girls who were below the rate of the level of obesity. And you can see that the line is a little bit more advanced. So the girls were maturing a little bit earlier if they were normal weight or underweight. The left-handmost line, the red line, looks at the girls who were overweight, and they matured earlier than the other 2 groups. So regardless, the girls were maturing earlier, and if they were overweight, they were more likely to mature earlier. This is the next slide, and this is something that we were a little surprised at, and We are now submitting it for publication, and it's looking at the bone density relative to the timing of puberty. And you can see that the early maturing girls appear to have higher levels of bone mineral density than the on-time girls and the girls who were maturing later. So we were a little surprised at that the early maturing girls did have a greater amount of bone density. And so we're going to be following that up over the next couple of years to see if that type of relationship still holds. So let's get back a little bit to the environmental exposures. Many of you aren't aware that there's about 90,000 different chemical compounds that are produced every year. And there are 2,000 different compounds that are added every year. Overall, between 10 and 15,000 compounds are used in the United States, and nearly 3,000 of them are produced in high volume. And in high volume, we're referring to chemicals that are produced over 1 million pounds apiece. Nearly none of them have been tested for their effects on the human body, particularly around timing of pubertal maturation. And of those that are tested, only pure compounds are tested, not looking at mixtures. Well, we live, of course, in a sea of mixtures of different chemicals. We've been doing some analyses looking at some of these exposures, and we have a paper that we published earlier this year that suggests a modest delay in the timing of pubertal maturation with greater amounts of the consumption, that is, eating certain phytoestrogens. So these are plant sources of estrogen, things that we eat all the time, and they include things such as soy. So with greater amounts of consumption of certain phytoestrogens, there's a modest delay in pubertal maturation. Well, where are we going to be going? As I've suggested, we're going to continue looking at bone density because we want to sort of take a look at the young women as they hit their maximum calcium content in their bone. Some of the girls will be getting DEXA scans this upcoming year, but we've just sent a proposal in to the NIH to do another visit or two after the current study, and again, to look at the maximum amount of calcium that's in the bone. We also want to examine some of the early risk markers for breast cancer. Again, this is not a study of breast cancer per se, but looking at things that might be related to risk of breast cancer later in their life, later as in a decade or 2 or 3. And what we're proposing is doing something called an MRI, or magnetic resonance imaging scans, looking at tissue density. The advantage of the MRIs is that there's no radiation, and the young women won't need to undress in order to do these MRI scans. A lot of you have asked, well, what can I do now? You know, you're looking at these exposures. We're finding very small effects of exposures, but we feel that any exposure that occurs is probably more exposure than you really need of some of these chemicals. So our recommendations: to limit the consumption of beverages that contain sugar in them. We recommend eating breakfast every day. Interestingly, people who eat breakfast every day weigh a few pounds less than people who skip breakfast. And that has to do with sort of the body revving up and using more energy if there's breakfast around. If you're fasting, the body stays fasting until lunchtime, and it actually burns off fewer calories. We're recommending limiting the number of meals that are eaten at fast food restaurants. And we're encouraging families to eat dinners together. As your mom told you, we're also recommending that you eat more fresh fruits and vegetables. For physical activity, limit the amount of screen time to 2 hours daily. Remove the television as well as computers from the bedrooms. And we're recommending that these young women engage in vigorous physical activity every day. The American Academy of Pediatrics and the National Football League both recommend 60 minutes of exercise every day. If you can't do it every day, then try to do it 3 to 4 times a week. And I encourage the whole family to participate because it's more fun that way. These recommendations are very similar to the same recommendations that we discuss in the prevention of obesity. But these are good things overall. The other things that we're going to be recommending are trying to limit the amount of phthalates that the young women are exposed to. There's a lot of different cosmetic lines that are now producing phthalate-free cosmetics. And you can find them online if you search Not Too Pretty or Skin Deep. I'm recommending using these products in moderation and use them appropriately. Never put plastic into a microwave. Even if it says microwave safe, don't put the plastic into a microwave. What's happening in the microwave is that it leaches out the phthalates that are in the flexible plastics. Sunscreen is important, but that there's also some products within sunscreen. Again, you want to try to limit the amount of phthalates and as well as phenols that you're exposed to. You should be using organic products. If you're going to be using the organic products, you should go online again and look at the Dirty Dozen. These are the vegetables and the fruits that have higher levels of insecticides and pesticides on them. Lastly, I'd like to thank a lot of different people. I'm just the face person here. But we couldn't do it without you and your daughters in the study. We couldn't do it without the support of the breast cancer community. They've served as our community voice, and they've worked with us to frame the questions that we ask, as well as they've made recommendations and have helped us share the findings with you. I'd like to thank my research colleagues at the other sites, and I'd like to thank, of course, in the picture, our fabulous Growing Up Female staff. Our grant has been supported generously through several different agencies. And again, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to discuss this all with you. Have a great day.